fellow members and guests to the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies and our monthly lunchtime lecture. The lecture today is going to be delivered by one of our valued members, Major General Retired Tim Ford, who will be introduced by one of the clients.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the sixth in our lecture series for this year. As you can see, the title of today's lecture is The Case for United Nations Peace Operations and Their Future. And as Kim has said, it will be presented by one of our members, Major General Tim Ford, AO Retired. Tim Ford is based in Sydney as an international peace and security consultant. He retired from the Australian Regular Army in January 2003, following a 40-year career in the Australian Army and with the United Nations in peacekeeping operations and peacekeeper training. He saw active service in Vietnam, was the commanding officer of the 4th Field Regiment Royal Australian Artillery, Director of Artillery and Commander of the 1st Division. Tim was appointed Royal Australian Artillery Representative Colonel Commandant from 2004 till 2012. He is on the executive of the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales Division. Tim has just returned from a United Nations peacekeeping retreat in Vienna, so is well placed to tell us about current thinking. Would you please welcome Major General Tim Ford to the panel.
Thanks very much, Ron. Can everyone hear me all right? I'm never quite sure whether I'm projecting at with being a gunner and with hearing aids that sometimes work and sometimes don't. So if I'm not speaking loudly enough, do let me know. Or if I'm yelling at you, please just come down a bit. Okay. So thanks very much for the introduction and good afternoon all. This is a subject which I think is important. The United Nations and peacekeeping I think is particularly important all the time, but particularly at the moment. But having said that, and it's a subject which I've obviously loved and very devoted to, when I was first approached to talk about this late last year, I was a bit hesitant. Because although I've still got contacts in the United Nations, obviously, and I'm involved through the United Nations Association, New South Wales, and various other aspects, and I follow what's happening on international affairs. It's over a decade since I was actually involved in a mission and actually working with peacekeepers themselves. So I was a bit cautious, but then in February I was invited to attend this retreat that I've just come back from in Vienna, which was a retreat of previous military advisors to the United Nations to look at the future of peacekeeping. So having been invited to that, I was happy to then at least have a go at telling you a little bit today about peacekeeping and where it is at the moment in many ways. So let me just move to the next slide. That one should be up first. So I hope that I can assist in basically helping what the Secretary General is trying to say here, that the importance of the United Nations and of course peacekeeping in particular as one of the has to be equipped for today's realities and tomorrow's challenges. But I think we'd all agree that over the last 18 months or so, the UN has been under considerable pressure. And from some areas, criticisms for the way that it's tried to maintain what I would say is a balanced and impartial attitude to everything that's going on in the world, and in very difficult times, trying to get, particularly associated with the war in Gaza, very strong views on different views, and that, of course, the Secretary General is trying to represent what is a balanced view, an impartial view, and a humanitarian view about what is happening there. Because of that, of course, there's been some criticisms, and there's always, if you look back, been some criticisms of the UN, and the UN doesn't have the chance to defend itself because it is no nation. It's comprised of 193 member states that come together, and it does what it's basically allowed to do. So the other point I think I'd make at the start is, of course, we're in a period of increased tension. The forever wars are going on, as described by Lawrence Freeman in the recent Foreign Affairs article. They continue in Ukraine and in the Middle East and in the middle of Africa as well. Forever wars are going on there, and in fact there are at the moment some 50 continuing conflicts going on around the world. Amazing to think of that. We don't see much of that here in Australia. We read a bit about it, we hear a bit about it on our TV shows and our think tanks, but we don't actually get exposed to the full activity of what's going on in the world. There's a rising number of conflicts actually over the years, and we've got really what is a geopolitically fragmented world. Many of these, of course, are internal and non-international conflicts, but on the other hand, there are 78 countries that are actually involved in the conflicts outside of their own territories. So there's a lot of activity going on out there, which is quite difficult to manage. Many agreed international rules and processes are being ignored at the moment. There's a strategic shift, I think, in the balance of power. We've got changing spheres of influence and a lack of trust about relationships between countries and nations. And as a result, many nations are now seriously reviewing and increasing their defence capability. And I understand why that's happening and why there's pressure, particularly in this country, to do that as well. With nations are now considering up to 5% of their GDP, particularly in Europe, to be on defence capabilities. And while this is benefiting some people, I'm not quite sure whether it's actually going to be seriously act as a deterrence. It actually may well be a catalyst for conflict in some ways. And the associated decrease in funds to meet the increase in defence capability will be coming from areas of development and aid, which are the very areas which are needed to try and prevent conflict in my mind. So we're going through difficult times. The current world situation really should concern us all. It should make us understand the importance of having the United Nations and its 193 member states, which provides the platform for multilateral discussions through its organs such as the Security Council and the General Assembly. And it also is the basis of the creation of agreed international agreements that are monitored by the United Nations and member states. I think it highlights for us as well the importance of the United Nations 39 of the various UN programs and special organisations that exist. So there's just a few of them here. There are some 39 of those organisations which are involved in making the world work in many respects. So that includes important organisations such as the International Civil Aviation Organisation, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and at a time when we have 30 million refugees in the world and 120 million people displaced around the world. The World Health Organization, and we all saw the importance of that during the period we had with the pandemic. And of course also such things as the Atomic Energy Agency, International Energy Agency. These are obviously organisations which are important, and they consider the interests of all nations, and they provide a balance between the challenges that emerge in the concept of a multilateral world. So multilateral cooperation is what the beating heart of the United Nations is all about, but it's only as strong as each and every country's commitment to it. Complex international agreements cannot be solved by nations acting unilaterally, and we're seeing a lot of that going on at the moment. The process needs political support from all to ensure a united international community and a peaceful, stable world, particularly from well-resourced and stable countries like Australia. Peace is more than just the absence of war, and it's even more than more than the absence of violence as well as war, and it's even further more than the fear of violence. It goes further than that. And many of you will be aware of the Australian-based International Institute for Economics and Peace and their reports and research. Their positive peace program describes these attitudes, institutions and structures that create and sustain a peaceful societies. Positive peace is associated with many other desirable outcomes for a stable society, such as higher GDP growth, better measures for well-being, higher levels of resilience, and more harmonious communities. This approach describes an optimum environment for human potential to flourish. Countries with high levels of positive peace have more resilience and associated with robust and thriving economics, better performance on ecological measures, higher levels of well-being and happiness, stronger measures of social cohesion, and greater satisfaction with living standards. These are the characteristics which we should be aiming for to build in emerging and developing nations, particularly those that are coming out of conflict. And peacekeeping and peace building support this concept. They support this concept of positive peace, and they provide a way of ending conflict, especially long-lasting conflicts. So peacekeeping is a principal role of the United Nations when it was formed in 1945, some 80 years ago, and it's outlined quite clearly in Article 1 of the Charter, which clearly tells us about the maintenance of international peace and security. Now this is a role that it's clearly not able to fully achieve, but one that has been assisted by the development of international peace operations, initiated through the United Nations starting in 1947, some 78 years ago. These peace operations are coordinated by the United Nations, and they're normally understood to include both peacekeeping operations by the Department of Peace Operations and peace building, which is run by the Commission, the Peacekeeping Commission. And they've often proved to be an effective tool of the United Nations to assist countries to navigate the difficult path from conflict to stable peace. Importantly, these are not peace-making activities. The operations and peace operations can really only commence once at least a partial peace exists, some sort of stable cessation of hostilities. And really, for peace operations to be successful, there must be that basis of peace to keep. Those that have failed on peace operations is normally because that situation has not been occurred, and the United Nations being forced or have been gone into a situation where there is not a peace to keep. The peacekeeping success is also correlated with the extent to which conflict parties actually want to make peace at any one particular time. The aim of peace operations outlined in their mandates and signed by the United Nations Security Council is to provide a safe and secure environment for that peace to develop, thus allowing a wide range of other UN agencies and NGOs to actually arrive and deploy and assist the return to a stable environment. The United Nations peace operations get their mandates from the UN Security Council. Their military, police and some key civilians are provided by contingents or individuals and by member states, and they're managed by the Department of Peace Operations in New York, supported by the Department of Operational Support. Having been part of that process, I can assure you that there are many people working very hard to ensure that these operations have every chance to succeed. At any one time, there are more than a dozen UN peacekeeping missions. There were some 16 when I was a military advisor. And these are missions such as the United Nations Disengagement Force in the Golan Heights or the mission in the Congo. And these operations are commanded by UN appointees and resources that come from member states, and they're placed under the operational control of the United Nations. Such missions are often dangerous, difficult and volatile, and they deploy into regions where all normal administrative structures and processes are often collapsed. Over 4,600 peacekeepers have died in missions since 1948. In addition, there are other international peace operations, not blue helmets or blue beret missions, coordinated by regional organisations or a coalition of interested states, such as Interfed, which went into Timor, Ramsey, the regional assistant mission to the Solomon Islands, and so sort of missions. These are put together by regional organisations or coalitions of the Willings, and they're authorised by the United Nations through Chapter 8 of the Charter. These peacekeeping missions can be tasked with various activities. They facilitate the peace process, they protect the civilians where the host nations cannot. They assist often in the disarmament, mobilisation and reintegration of civilian combatants. They can initiate demining, organise elections, promote human rights, and generally support the development of state institutions again and the economy. They strive to provide that positive environment that I talked about for peace development. Over the last decade, there's been normally about 60 peace operations active. Some half by regional organisations, the African Union, the European Union, NATO, ECOWAS, Economic Commission of West African States, and so on. And about a third being United Nations peacekeeping or peace building missions, and then a few other coalitions. So some 60 operations going on in those conflicts that I talked about before around the world. And studies clearly show that the largest and most effective of these operations are the UN missions. 2/3 of all UN peace operations have been assessed as successful. Academic studies consistently demonstrate that peacekeeping is a cost-effective way of reducing armed conflict and protecting lives. It strengthens national sovereignty and it allows states to recover and exercise their basic functions. The real-world impact of peacekeeping is visible in places like Cambodia, Sierra Leone, Timor-Leste, and Namibia, which stand as compelling positive examples of what the UN and peacekeeping are doing. And achieves its peace positive track record by bringing together a wide number of stakeholders. It's multilateralism in action, building agreement between the permanent and the elected members of the Security Council, major financial contributors, host countries, UN agencies, and then non-government organisations, both international ones and regional ones, to bring into the organisation. And over 2/3 of UN member states actually provide contingents to go to these. About 123 different members of the 193 actually provide police and military contingents or individuals to UN peace operations at this stage. Despite criticisms, the UN retains unparalleled authority and legitimacy to convene major key stakeholders when crises erupt. Its basic principles of peacekeeping: consent of the major parties, agreement internationally and nationally for consent to occur, impartiality, and impartiality rather than neutrality, impartiality applying the rules of the peace agreement, and the non-use of force except in self-defence and defence of the mandate have stood the test of time. And they built a powerful reputation for the UN as impartial stewards for peace processes. UN military and police do have agreed rules of engagement and directions for use of force, and these do allow deadly force where appropriate to retain credibility and to implement the mandate. It may be in getting freedom of movement, it may be in implementing movement across a temporary security zone or whatever it is, but the use of force is available, but in accordance with the mandate. Even when the Security Council has been divided on other issues, it regularly forwards the consensus of deploying peace operations. And it's an important attribute in the world that is increasingly volatile, fragmented, complex and contested, and where UN member states are able to support the operations. Asserting that peacekeeping is working is not to overlook its failures and to overstate what it can achieve. It is under considerable pressure at the moment. The United Nations Security Council is divided, and member states have grown wary of large integrated missions, which were what was happening during the late 90s and the early 20s. And the issue of protection of civilians has become particularly critical, and they've become wary of that action as well. No new mission has actually been authorised for over a decade. Cuts in the current missions are more than 20% are being implemented at the moment in response to non-payment of the normal commitments of several major member states. This is the greatest area of uncertainty at the moment, with the US $1.5 billion behind in its payments, and China over $500 million as well. They're in arrears of their payments. And the US is threatening, under the Trump organisation, to zero out all its assessed payments going forward. And the US is looking at how to do less with less. I make the point you can't do more with less, what people often ask for. You can only do less with less. Of course, there are things that can be done. but there are devastating impacts on missions which are already overstretched in terms of resources and wide mandates. It comes at a time, of course, when conflict is changing, with new technology involved, including unmanned aerial systems, cyber and artificial intelligence. And that's having an impact on the environment in which these peace operations are deployed, and where peacekeepers are actually more frequently under attack and subject to both misinformation and disinformation. And in fact, there were over 450 attacks on UN peace operations since November last year. 450 attacks. The reaction to that, of course, is that for safety and security, the UN has to spend more money in making their operations harder, and that both costs money and it also makes them less transferable and less in commitment with the actual people that they're trying to do. It's very important that the UN gets involved with the area that it's actually in. Over the years, there have been a series of reviews by the UN, and I've been involved in a number of those, going back to the Brahimi report when I was a military advisor. And there's a big review that's just been completed called the Pact for the Future. And this really looks very closely at, adopted in the UN last year, and it has a major commitment to adopt peacekeeping to our changing world to better respond to the challenges and the conflict realities. It's included a review to analyse the success of peacekeeping, and it understands the strengths and weaknesses and to design a new future-focused peacekeeping models clearly anchored in political solutions, adequately resourced with achievable mandates and clear exit strategies. Following the pact, more than 130 ministers and government officials gathered in the Berlin Peacekeeping Ministerial meeting in May this year to take stock of the current climate of conflict and crisis and to look ahead at the future of peacekeeping. There's a clear intent amongst all the member states to make peace operations more focused and more adaptive. Discussions at the conference were underpinned by a report on the future of peacekeeping, which analysed the tasks and the UN peace operations have been tasked with. And there are many tasks over the years that the UN has been tasked with. These are some of the critical ones at the start of operations. Gives you an idea of the many things that these UN Security Council resolutions ask the peacekeepers to do. This provided a platform for delegations, including Australia, to announce substantial pledges to support closing of capability gaps and adapting peace operations for better respond to existing challenges. These initiatives were then further supported by that military advisors retreat that I attended just 2 weeks ago in Vienna. And the retreat was addressed to the future of peacekeeping, was attended by some 15 2-star to 4-star officers, military officers, all who had been the military advisor at some stage or the deputy military advisor to the United Nations, going back to before the end of back in the 1990s, in fact. I think the oldest person there was about 85. But there were plenty of people there, and it was included the Secretary General of the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations, Under Secretary General Jean-Pierre Thoreau. It had the current acting military advisor. The acting military advisor at the moment is Major General Cheryl Pearce from Australia. She's doing a fantastic job as the military advisor. And there were some, let's say, 14 or 15 other retired 2- and 4-star military officers from all over the world: Scandinavia, Africa, South America, Europe, and Asia, and of course myself at it as well. And they've all not only served as military advisors, most of them have been commanders of other UN missions and so on. And so there's a lot of gathered intellectual information there, a lot of important comments and discussion, and we looked for 2 or 3 days over all those aspects of the UN and made some conclusions. And they basically, to some of the things that came out of the military advisors' troops, that the UN can continue to provide a viable pathway through peacekeeping for peaceful operations to develop from conflict, but it's unlikely to get political agreement to assemble the necessary capability or the tools to unilaterally conduct peace enforcement operations. And as those of you who know the UN Security Council and you that know the Charter, it talks about peace enforcement as well as specific operations. Really, it is not going to be happening with the United Nations. Peacekeeping, I think, is probably at a tipping point at the moment. It's got to prepare properly for the future environment with smaller peacekeeping footprint focused on specific tasks, those tasks that have been carrying out. Let's try and get away from these big integrated missions, be clear on what the small footprint is going to be, and make sure that they can do it. UN peacekeeping should continue to develop the partnership with regional organisations and assist their advocacy for peace operations, including protection of civilians. And the UN should continue to introduce the tools and technologies that can make its peace operations more cost effective, including counter, UAS and AI. These sort of lessons really build on the sort of lessons that have come out of the UN operating for many, many years. And these are such things as ensuring that we've got an achievable mandate. And then that's been outlined clearly in the UN Security Council. There's often a lot of discussion that goes into the UN Security Council mandate. It takes many weeks sometimes for that to develop. But it's got to be an achievable mandate. And it's got to be supported by quickly and deploying appropriate capabilities and resources to support the mandate. And some of the things the UN has done about that over the years is it now has a peacekeeping capability readiness system which allows countries to actually nominate what sort of capabilities they may be able to provide: infantry, artillery, ships, so on, police. And they're allowed to operate and advise at different levels. There's a readiness level, there's level 1, level 2, level 3. And it means that they're trying to get the UN, the nations, to actually indicate what they will be able to provide and at what sort of notice they will provide to that. But also very clear that we must have clear team leadership. The mission leadership team, the special representative of the Secretary General, who's normally coming from a diplomatic background, running the mission, deputies who are running the country team and the other activities from the UN Development Programme and other people, the Force Commander, the Police Commissioner and the mission support people have all got to come together as a united mission leadership team and actually provide a vision and get that mandate done. And that hasn't always been the case. So very much the case now, looking and making sure that the Force Commanders and other people who are appointed are people who have had experience in United Nations peacekeeping preferably before and can do the job and come forward properly. They need to work in partnership with regional and local organisations, deploying well-prepared and equipment contacts. One of the issues I had when I was a military advisor is I used to say to the troop contributing countries, provide me with an asset and not a liability. Because in many cases we were getting at that stage, some 20 years ago now, units being deployed that actually were not well trained or well prepared, and they were more of a liability in the mission than a capability. Since then, there's been a lot of doctrine put out there, there's been a lot more discussion with member states about the individual contingents that are coming and trying to make sure that they are an asset, not a liability. There is now agreed and UN peace operations doctrine which is out there that's being run and looked at by the various regional and national peacekeeping training centres. Our own centre uses UN peacekeeping doctrine now to teach and prepare our own contingents before they go overseas. And the other important thing is to maintain that relevancy with steady progress towards a stable environment. If that's not happening in a mission, then we get into the problems of a mission. Now, if those recommendations and lessons are followed, then there is a good case to continue and use and expand peace operations because they are normally effective. They lead to resolution of the causes of the conflict. They allow peace agreement, a cessation of hostilities to mature and develop. They often provide safety and security to local people. They provide time for the longer solutions to be considered and establish a platform for other UN agencies and international organisations to assist national development. They support the rebuilding of national institutions, services and structures, the police, the justice, the elections and governments, all that can occur while a peace operation is there. And they make economic sense. UN peace operations cost approximately $6 billion a year, less than 0.5% of the annual military expenditure that is occurring around the world. Ukraine reconstruction itself would cost over $500 billion. Military support to Ukraine is greater than $250 billion over the last 3 years, not to mention what it's cost Russia. Global spending on defence is going up. It's now $2.7 trillion, and UN peacekeeping is $6 billion. Not a lot, less than a quarter of Australia's defence budget. And it's providing those 11 to 12, 15 missions, plus all the other peace building activities that are going on. So how about Australia in all this? Australia does have a good record, a proud record of service in international peacekeeping missions and peace operations commanded by United Nations and regional activities. We've been involved in more conflicts as peacekeepers than we have as combatants, as clearly outlined on the Australian Peacekeeping Memorial and Anzac Parade in Canberra. Australia did deploy the very first civilian and military observers as peacekeepers in the United Nations Good Officer mission in Indonesia in September 1947. That's why we call our Australian Peacekeeping Day the 14th of September each year. Australia has deployed those first activities, and in the 78 years since, Australian governments have deployed a wide range of contingents all around the world, comprising both armed and unarmed military, police and civilian experts, to over 60 international peacekeeping missions. All those missions are shown on the Peacekeeping Memorial in Canberra. Supporting the UN peacekeeping practice operations is a practice that Australia should continue and possibly support. That mission just shows you some of the missions that we've been involved in. That's one page of 60 missions that Australia's have been involved in since 1947. But Australia should strongly support this because it allows development and implementation for individuals and contingents of many of the military activities that they need to have for defence of the country, including, I might add, retention and recruiting. Out of the international dialogue last month, we talked a lot about this, but one of the points that I believe is that the idea of being able to deploy on peace operations and to it would be a good recruitment capability, and I believe also the fact that deploying actually and a number of people going on these UN peace operations actually is good retention capability as well. And it also gives you then the chance to practice nearly all the capabilities other than offensive operations, deployment, risk analysis, leadership, working with other nations, logistics, all of those things happen during a UN deployment. It would demonstrate Australia's positive interest in the regional and international affairs. It benefits the UN with our very experienced and professional staff, and it develops good relationships between UN contingents and nations. And of course it will support a multilateral approach to international security. At the main ministerial meeting, Australia demonstrated commitment to support UN peace operations by offering strategic airlift in crisis situations, training, capacity building programs and more money for conflict prevention and peace building. I believe Australia can and should in fact do more to consistently support the United Nations and other peace operations. The UN can undertake a significant role in international peace and security, but only if it is given the right tools. This includes well-prepared, responsible and effective military, police and civilian contingents and individuals, supported by modern capabilities and key enablers to conduct effective and flexible security operations. Not only can Australia provide such contingents and capabilities, but it can also assist others to do the same. And I think it's in our national interest and international peace and security for Australia to be preemptive and consistent with strong commitment to UN operations around the globe. I believe there is a clear case for Australia to promote positive peace and to support the United Nations in other all peacekeeping and peace building activities. Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention two activities. One is there is a United Nations conference on shaping the UN at 80, shaping for the future, which you may be interested in. You can go on the website, have a look. You're very welcome to go to attend. And of course, every year we run a commemorative service at the Cenotaph on the 24th of October, which is UN Day. And again, you would be very welcome to attend and be involved with that. So you can find it on the website, UNAA website for New South Wales. Please, you're welcome to be involved in that.
General Paul, I think this has been a most timely reminder of what has become the elephant in the room, which is the United Nations, which is often treated with ignore until the last possible moment. Our politicians go on ad nauseum about the need for a rules-based order. No one ever explains what that is, but surely contribution to the United Nations and its peacekeeping efforts is critical to maintaining that and giving us, if you like, a moral authority in terms of a deterrence of aggression. And we should never forget that. And I'm reminded on that, not quite peacekeeping, I'm sure you'll remind me, but Sunday was the 72nd anniversary of the signing of the armistice on the Korean Peninsula, which in turn led to a UN peacekeeping mission. General, it's been a wonderful time having you this afternoon to remind us about some key things, which in all the rest of the clutter we sometimes forget. Can I offer these to you? Thank you so much.